Hello. I have decided to save my role playing oriented reflections for each episode as a unit, which usually will mean, a couple sessions, for a couple of reasons. I don't want to microanalyze, and I want to be able to reflect on sort of the story of what we did relative to how we played and how the system worked. Can't really do that from sort of inside each session as well. And so, what will I do instead? Well, I could just not do anything, but hey, everybody is making the videos, and I kind of feel like I'm not doing my bit. Well, I've decided to go a little Star Trek-y, and whether it's relevant to what we've done or not will vary. And in this case, I just wanted to talk a bit about the original series and its creatures. And how this relates to our game is not directly relevant because we haven't faced any monstrosities or, beings or anything like that. But we might. And so maybe it's kind of fun to just keep in mind, what the original series was like for that. And I'll start right away by saying that I have no interest in self-reference. I don't want, while we play, somebody to say, and you can see the zipper running up its back or anything like that. I'm not interested in that whatsoever. Part of this has to do with the way that I encountered these creatures on my TV screen. And with all acknowledgement of, old guy in place here, it was necessary to fill in and to replace what you were visually experiencing with your own imagination. That's part of what you had to do in order to enjoy. I will go so far as to say that you still have to do that, but that's a dialogue or debate for another day. Well, anyway, so here we are, and we're looking at the various entities, bearing in mind that this is a very ambitious television show. It's certainly not the first space adventure show, with its own share of critters and whatnot in it, or space horror show, which actually this one is somewhat was more of a space horror show than a space adventure show, if you ask me. And what we have is a range, of course. I'll leave out certain things. For example, a lot of the time they relied on energy beings of one sort or another, or otherwise completely non-humanoid, concepts. And most of the time what you would get is to create an animation of colored lights on separate film stock, and then you just run the two film stocks together simultaneously, and then you get the crew interacting with a glowy ball. And that is possible and relatively, easier to manage cost-wise than many other things. And it can be well done or poorly done. And there's a lot of that in the original show. I'm going to leave that aside. And I'm also going to leave out, humanoid alien species that is basically a different color and with a couple of details, which you see a fair amount of as the show continues, and are often a way to have sort of natives on a planet who are worshiping a god that turns out to be a computer or something like that. So I'm not really going to focus on those particularly. I'm more interested in things that are live action and which are threatening or unearthly in some scary way. And there's not as many as I thought, actually, in the original series. Thinking back on it, I was like, oh, there's a bunch of those things. And then I counted on my fingers. And there's not that many. You sort of have to reach to get past 5 fingers. And in so reaching, you end up with 2 ends that are fairly easy to process. One is such a creature which is played by a person and is humanoid enough that it's recognizable, as a person. They're not trying to disguise the fact that it's a humanoid played by a humanoid human. So that's pretty much where you have Rook in What Are Little Girls Made Of. He's not human. And the actor's physical qualities, this was the same guy who played Lurch in the original Addams Family show. So he's, pushing 7 feet in height already. And they gave him big old shoes that he wore under his robes. And so he was actually pushing 8 feet tall on set, as a live action performer. And the design of the costume is very effective. The makeup is suitably, dehumanizing. He doesn't have appurtenances. They don't put horns on him or anything like that. So it's basically shading and coloration. And the actor's skill, because this particular actor could be very graceful and very fast. And so when he does like android stuff, it's really freaky, actually. So he is, in my opinion, you don't have to fill in a lot. You don't have to fill in on that any more than you have to do for anyone else's makeup or any other details of production. So that's kind of the easiest, if you would, with the least amount of fill-in going on, simply, and again, because of genuine technical skill at work. This is what I call, some effective effects. So then you go to the other end and you'll see a couple of things that I couldn't get past. Couldn't get past then as a kid. Have a real hard time getting past now. And probably top of that list would be the flying creatures in Operation Annihilate, which I'm sad to say are not easily distinguishable to the viewer from being just wads of rubber. I think they're even novelty rubber vomit that are sort of thrown like frisbees and are supposed to be these flying creatures that are trying to get you. And maybe, I don't know if that's actually what they were, but that's pretty damn close to what they look like. And they don't do anything except sort of frisbee across the screen. So anyway, my take is that I don't fill in well on that episode. And similarly, I don't fill in well for the silicon creatures in The Savage Curtain, because both of those episodes are flatly ungood. They are not interesting episodes. They are not, for lack of a better word, fun for me. I don't regard them as, if someone says, hey, let's go watch an episode of the old Star Trek, and I'll probably say, oh yeah, sure. They say, hey, it's The Savage Curtain. And I'll probably say, I'm sure I can find something else to do while you do that. So given that, I think that's kind of the make or break, is the episode that they're embedded in. Because if you're invested in the episode, not just out of nostalgia, but because of you're watching the story, you're interested in how the characters are coping with it, and you're pretending that it's real time that you're watching, and you're wondering what they're going to do next and get yourself into that frame of mind, then the filling in of whatever needs to be for the creature is possible. Even if it were visually those same things that I just described, the creatures in Operation Annihilate, which are, they would require a great deal of effort to do, or a great deal of cognitive activity to get yourself into taking them seriously. And then the creatures in The Savage Curtain, who are people in rock suits. And the episode's just, I cannot get into the episode enough for that cognitive effect to occur. So Rook, on one hand, excellent episode, excellent effect, minimal cognitive effort to do it, arguably one of the very better, sort of non-human live action threatening presences in the show. On the other end, you've got the Operation Annihilate and Savage Curtain Creatures. Let's go back to the Rook end, though, because I want to look at the things that, unlike Rook, as Rook, hard to say his name right, unlike Rook, it is not the case that the Gorn, the Salt Vampire, the Mugato, and I guess we could come up with a couple of others. It's not the case that they're humanoid enough to be played naturalistically by a human. They're monsters. They're monstrous. But they have to be played by people in some form or another. The Horta goes in there too. Now, in all of these cases, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, what do I have to do? Do these work for me? How much do I like this episode? How much does the creature, as a physical presence and its qualities as a science fiction being make this episode work? And I have to give massively high marks to the Salt Vampire, which is a very non-naturalist, it's non-human design. It is a person in a suit, and the suit is not a person. And it is, in my opinion, and this may be aided by the fact that you don't see it do much in its literal form. Most of the time you're seeing it through the projection of its prey, because the prey sees it as a particular idealized or loved one, or someone that they find attractive and interesting or emotionally compelling. And therefore we mostly see it that way. However, when you get a look at it and realize that it had been sitting there looking like that in the situations where we saw instead the character's projection, the actor's ability to be convincing about this, the direction, the scripting, and the cutting, especially the editing, does a really nice job of allowing the mind in those few seconds that you get to look at the thing. You rewrite the whole episode in your mind and say, oh, so that's what it looked like in that scene. That's what it looked like in that scene. And in a lot of cases, you kind of shudder. It's like, oh man, there's this sensitive conversation between, a woman and an alluring stranger, or this fairly, emotionally fraught scene between a man and his long lost lover. And you look back and you say, oh, that's what he was talking to. That's what she was talking to. Ooh. Right? And the thing's pretty spooky looking. It's sort of human, and it's got the straggly hair. It's got this lamprey mouth. It seems to be dressed in some sort of net. We know it's it's described as an intelligent animal, and on more than one occasion it speaks for itself, not just what the prey wanted. So we know, that it might have been able, maybe it dressed itself too. Was it that smart or cultured or something? So it's creepy, and it gives you that nice touch of the theme of the episode of, yes, it's a predator. Yes, it's loose on the ship. Yes, it is so dangerous that you cannot trust yourself. Even if you're certain you have to kill it, it's a monster, but your perceptions are overwhelming you, and you cannot bring yourself to kill that person. So therefore, the sensible, sort of the anti-Romero response of, well, if we all just did this, we could hunt it down and kill it. We could lure it with salt. We could lure it into the brig. We could have kept it in enforcement. Could have. No, you couldn't. Somebody on your little posse team is suddenly going to defend it, hide it, protect it. And it could well be you. So, taking your shot when you can is the only chance they have. And yet the whole business of, well, it's an intelligent animal. It's really doing nothing morally wrong whatsoever. You just happen to be a prey animal for it. And it is, it as I keep saying, the last of its kind. The episode carries quite a sting about that. Has the crew really done the right thing? Maybe they did all they could, but even so, was that the right thing? Is very nicely handled. It's science fiction, it's horror, And it is a character study of everybody in the show. It's particularly good in this regard. And the visuals of the character are strong and brief and allow you to do a lot of the work. Because it's asking you to fill in so much of the plot, you can also fill in if it needs it. I'm not sure it does. But if you need to fill in, taking seriously its physical appearance, the whole thing is laid out like a carpet for your minds to do this, I think. So even the smallest willingness to do this is rewarded dramatically. So what else? What other creatures are in question here? Well, certainly we've got the Gorn. Certainly we have the Mugato. And certainly we have the Horta. Let's take a look at all of these as visuals. And, okay, personal judgment, they all require a lot of viewer work. They require viewer cognitive work. Maybe you don't feel it as effort. I don't feel it as effort. But I know my brain has to do a whole bunch of dial switching in order to say, okay, he's fighting the Gorn. Oh no, the Horta, it's coming at them. Oh look, the Horta made letters in the burned letters into the floor. Or no, the Mugato, it's biting him. He'll be poisoned. That kind of thing. There's a lot of clicking and whirring going on back there. A lot more, I think, certainly than for Rook or the Salt Vampire. And why can I do it when I cannot manage it for Operation Annihilate with the thingies that, flip through the air and bite you and kill you, or the rock creatures in the Savage Curtain? Why can I do it with those three? And I think it really does come down to engagement with the episode as plot, as characterization, as decision-making. If I'm interested in the plight of the characters and the situation that they're in. And in each case, we have a pretty good science fiction / horror context that, for lack of a better word, makes me want to care about the monster. Not care about sympathetically, although that is the case for two of them. I'm talking more about give it credence as a monstrous presence as I watch the poor stunt person do what they have to do with what they were given. And in the case of the Gorn, you've got a costume, which is this lizard head. And the eyeballs don't move. They give it faceted eyes, which helps a little bit with that. And you kind of have to see the actor, work hard for the body language to make this thing seem, like a moving and threatening, physically athletic and dangerous opponent in this arena-like situation. And the same thing goes for the Horta, which I will submit has been badly treated by pop culture by giving it cruel nicknames. But the fact is that if you watch the episode as plot and actually interestingly contrast it with the Salt Vampire, because the situations really aren't very different. In these circumstances, then this shapeless mound of, rubbery organic rock, shuffling around, scooting along in a big hump, bulky, rippling hump on the floor and exuding, phenomenal amounts of heat, dangerous to be around, capable of, burning you to a crisp at a touch. Well, I have to do some of those, clicks and buzzes back in my head for me to engage with it at that level. But if I pay attention to the story, and if I pay attention to the characters, and if I pay attention to what they know, they don't know, what they want, so different members of the crew and the miners, in the facility that the Horta is compromising, all of these things, if I can do that, which I do, then the Horta works for me. The Horta works for me just as well as the Gorn for all the same reasons. And the Mugato stands out in my mind as really not like any of the others I've described. I mean, everything, you know which ones I just cannot do. And you can see the ones which I can with no particular difficulty, but clearly different levels of, cognition at work to get there must be occurring. What's up with the Mugato? And this is from the episode A Private Little War. And what we see there, visually, I confess, properly belongs, down there with the 2 episodes that I have admitted that I cannot do. In case you don't know, the Mugato is a white furred gorilla, which is to say a store-bought gorilla suit with white fur. Don't know if it came that way, if they painted it, whichever. And it has a horn on its head sticking straight up, and it's got a series of spikes down its back. And is not going to win any awards, frankly. But as I say, for a number of these creatures, I don't think some of the others would either, but yet I'm good with them. Or, they tried. And I'm good with filling in the rest. And the Mugato, I can. It is a mental jump, I think. Far more felt mental jump than it is for the Gorn or the Horta. I know I'm doing it. And why do I? Again, it all comes back to the same message. Because the episode is a knockout in terms of characters, plots, people having different priorities and different degrees of knowledge or information at different times, making the decisions accordingly, attempting to do things. A lot of things come to grief. It is an episode it's one of the morally darkest, morally grim episodes in the entire original series. It's also explicitly topical, not just to the issues of the day, but I think it's relevant, today as well. It is a very grim, appalling statement about a lot of things. And you have fairly high demands on the production. A lot of it is shot, in the hills on location. There's a lot of action sequences out in those California hills that we're all so familiar with. And a lot of action. You have 2 distinct cultures, so they have to look different. On this planet, you have to have, there's Klingons involved, so you have Klingons show up and they're in their regalia and their makeup, and they needed a monster apparently, and so they ended up with a Mugato. And so if you're into the episode, you're following what all the characters are doing, and you are engaged in what's going on, then you kind of, when the Mugato shows up, you kind of gotta blur your eyes. You have to kind of blur out all the reasons why you'll just lose your grip on being on the engagement. But I can do it. Now, here's another thing that makes it super hard. Unlike all the others that I talked about, including some of the roughest ones, there's no reason for the Mugato to be what it is. It could look like anything. I mean, what you need is a predator, a local predator with a poisonous bite. That's what you need. You don't need anything else. So its qualities very much has that low grade production sense of dressing something up. Why not make it something easier to do? And who knows, maybe they ran out of time, ran out of ideas. They had so many other things to do in that episode, which had been through a few script changes and who knows what. But you end up basically with it looking the way it does for no science fiction reason. For no, the salt vampire has to be a salt vampire. The Horta has to be a Horta. The Gorn has to be a Gorn. Now, does the Gorn actually have to be a lizard guy? No, but it really works for the whole idea of I am in a savage arena combat with a non-human for whom I feel no kinship, and then you end up feeling the kinship. You see, that's important for the Gorn. So it being reptilian is a way for that to happen, and I get that. With the Mugato, there's nothing there. There's no correspondence with its physical qualities and what it is physically. I mean, did I just say that right? There's no correspondence between its physical nature, its qualities, and what it does, why it's there, what kind of impact it has, or sense of threat that it presents. The mismatch is really strong. So you really have to, the episode's quality as plot makes me engage enough to say, somehow back there in my nonverbal head, I have to say, I better make that work or I'm not going to enjoy this. And whoever it is or whatever it is, whatever neurons and lobes and whatever that are involved in this, roll up their sleeves and look at each other and say, all right, guys, we're earning it today. And I'm able to enjoy the episode and the Mugato in it. But certainly, those pieces and parts of my mind and brain have a much easier time with, the salt vampire and even with the Horta. Okay, so what does all of this or any of this have to do with role-playing? The answer is probably not too terribly much, except for one thing. We're in the same position. We are working off of what we say. We are imagining it. And the capacity to do that, in my experience, the way I go about it, the way it is for me, is that if and when I am turned on by the characters who are making decisions, my knowledge that hardly ever is anyone working with complete information, and with a fraught situation with consequences. There's the ship's going to blow up, or the villagers are going to get destroyed, or the society will fall apart, or this person will be killed, or this, whatever the crisis is. If I'm into it, I'm interested in the personalities that are struggling to cope with it, I'll get there. So I'm looking forward, should we encounter any such beings, my capacity to accept them, to be into them, is on full, because I got a good workout with the original series as a kid and as an adult, and with other shows a lot like it, the ones that aren't parodic, that aren't comedic about it. And I think it's well worth it. I don't need a source book from the publisher with a really good picture to convince me that that's a really good creature, given the skeleton, the good faith effort of presenting a good creature. A good faith effort, regardless of just how well it flies. I'm not going to say, oh, Game Master, you didn't describe that well enough for me. If the effort is good faith in this kind of crisis situation with characters who are interesting and coping and struggling with their various personal deficiencies or lack of information, I'll get there. So bring us on some creatures someday. Anybody playing this game with me, don't have to do anything just because I want to see it. But if you do, I'm there on the other end. I'm there ready to walk as far as humanly possible to meet what you present in good faith. And we'll have an awesome monster and an awesome story.